Hello Internet, welcome back to Trumps to Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. I'm going to be talking about a book and a movie this week, but I also am here right now to talk about the current season of Euphoria. I did a video about it a couple of weeks back. Somebody asked me to give an update. I was actually going to wait until the end of the season, but since I was asked, I thought I would talk about episodes 3, 4, and 5. Now, everybody seems to hate Euphoria now, and this has something to do with the fact that nobody likes its creator, Sam Levinson. I don't know anything about the guy, except that he is the son of a filmmaker and that he's just a couple of years younger than me. And both those things make enormous sense when watching this season of Euphoria. The first and second season of Euphoria were set in high school and they had a very clear and recognizable aesthetic. This third season, it's referencing cinema, a lot of Western stuff. The episode that I just saw also is referencing horror movies, monster movies, King Kong. I feel like the world of the third season of Euphoria is a cross between cinema and the internet. Sam Levinson has never existed in the real world. This is now evident. I think that the content of this season of Euphoria is basically an adaptation of Sam Levinson's Twitter timeline. It's like the post Elon Musk Twitter apocalypse adapted for screen. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Maybe it's neither. I feel like this season has some interesting aspects, but it's nowhere near as arresting as the original two seasons. And I want to get the most significant criticisms out of the way at the beginning before I talk about some of the things that I think are interesting or enjoyable about the season. Straight up front, I will say that Sam Levinson has been accused of being a misogynist, and somebody accused him of this in my comments, a very intelligent person who comments on this channel occasionally. I've always thought that Euphoria was kind of a portrayal of misogyny and the misogyny of the world and how that affects women, more than it was an endorsement or an execution of misogyny. But I think that perspective is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. That's because the first season and the second season were about high school and seemed to be about how, the internet, sexuality, adult sexuality, and the world in general impacts upon teenagers in the world that we live in today. And it was in a kind of hyper real sense. It wasn't realistic, but it was exaggerated in a way that was effective. This third season seems to be entirely about sex work and different permutations of it. So you have Rue, who is working for somebody who traffics women, and you have Jules, who is a sugar baby, and you have Maddie, who's running Cassie's OnlyFans. You have Cassie, who is an OnlyFans model. The only person from their group of friends who is not doing sex work is Lexi. Now, there are some thematic and symbolic excuses or explanations for this. This third season is also an exploration of the concept of sin and temptation. There's some very evident symbolism with Alamo about, the devil or the snake in the garden. You have this Christian family in the first episode. Euphoria has always been about vice, and about drugs and addiction and emotional temptation, sexual temptation. So you could be generous towards Sam Levinson in that respect. However, that will not get you away from the fact that of this group of childhood friends who are women, only one of them has a job that does not involve sex work. And that one is basically a self-insert for Levinson. It seems to me to be an appalling failure of imagination not to be able to imagine a woman in this world who is not doing sex work. What's more, the earlier seasons of Euphoria played with this very aestheticized, somewhat erotic, no holds barred nudity and sexuality, at the same time as it seemed to be showing some of the violence and damage of a misogynistic world upon its characters. That I think was more successful when it wasn't dealing with trafficking and the type of material that is being shown now, because the last sequence of the fifth episode, which shows Maddie going and kind of choosing two women to work with, who at least one of is definitely a trafficked woman, probably both. And it's just like a horizontal shot showing their crotches. To me, is like kind of reaching a point of being kind of grotesque. I also do think, though, that you have to kind of see this as a willful provocation on the part of Sam Levinson, who definitely knows how he's being talked about and how he has been talked about for the whole of the time he's been making Euphoria. And you see this in the sequence where Jules is invited by Lexi to do a painting for a television show, and she paints characters with both breasts and penises, and then is told to censor it. And she asks, which part she says should censor, and she's totally surprised. And then she makes the point like, oh, the breasts okay, but the penises aren't. And then in the end kind of does a protest by painting a large penis on the canvas. This to me is like a very sort of deliberate telling maneuver by Levinson, who's just kind of satirizing people's objection to sexuality and nudity within art, and he's drawing a parallel between what he does and what Jules is doing. But while we're talking about Jules, that character was very interesting, especially in the first season. And between the first and second season, Hunter Schafer collaborated on a standalone special episode about that character. This third season, Jules has no personality, no interiority, no apparent motivation, is completely flattened. And the only thing that is left about that character is that she's highly sexualized and trans. And I feel like that's a huge betrayal, because trans people, and especially trans women, are already highly sexualized. And although Jules was always a sexual character, there really is nothing about this character anymore apart from the fact that she's a sugar baby. Maddie as well seems to have no personality anymore. Nate, I also think so far is somewhat of a disappointment. He's one of the only remaining male characters from the original season. The idea with his character, I think, is that he tried to reform, but because he's so privileged and entitled, he just assumed that he would be able to reform and be rich at the same time. And actually what he's done is kind of channeled his antisocial tendencies into manipulating and conning people for money. I don't find him very interesting anymore. All right, so those are my reservations about this season, and they're fairly major still, even after 5 episodes. However, there are things about it that I do like. As it's gone on, I've decided that the score is not as bad as I thought it was. Like, I really miss Labyrinth, but they have used the music in quite a subtle and effective way. It's also more visual than I thought it was going to be. The first couple of episodes were disappointing, but there was a major improvement in the third episode when Nate and Cassie got married. There were loads of fantastic visual set pieces within that entire episode. I don't love the Western cowboy stuff, but some of it works. Like the bit where Bishop was in Laurie's house and threw the money across the room and all of that. That was really effective. I think a lot of the visuals around Cassie's online sex work, OnlyFans stuff is really well executed. And I know a lot of people find this to be another example of Sam Levinson just being kind of titillating, misogynistic male gaze. I sort of disagree with that. I think that what they've done with Cassie's character is bring an enormous part of the internet into mainstream entertainment. Like the start of this 5th episode, they just hit like a whole load of niche internet sexual practices. They're all sexual practices, on a lot of them fantasies, practices, types of filmmaking or pornography that have developed as far as I know, like through the internet. I don't hate what they've done with that storyline so far. I think it's kind of interesting. I also just think that, and I've said this before, but I think that Sydney Sweeney is really fearless, very funny, and really effective in this role as Cassie. The part where Nate was being beaten by a gangster and Cassie was just looking into the camera and doing kind of a monologue about how she'd broken a nail and her nose was bleeding and her wedding was ruined while her new husband is being assaulted violently behind her was like a real highlight for me. I found that hilarious. I think that's my like top moment of the season so far. I also think that the chemistry between Rue, Zendaya's character, and the kind of criminals around her is really great. Those actors are all doing amazing work. Having said that, like the kind of cartoonish gangster crime lord world that she's just entered. I said in my first video that it was like a Tarantino film. It's so much like a Tarantino film. And the degree to which Sam Levinson is indebted to Tarantino is frankly a little embarrassing in this season. I say that as somebody who doesn't particularly like Tarantino though. If you're into his films, maybe you would enjoy it as an homage. So I say all of this, and though a lot of it sounds critical, I think there's still something quite interesting about Euphoria. The first and second season, they had this sort of surreal, dreamlike quality that really reflected how it feels to be in high school, even if the events were heightened and exaggerated. They're continuing with this slightly absurd, surreal, exaggerated aspect. It doesn't reflect anymore like the life of being in school, but maybe this is a series about how the entire world feels like fiction now. The internet and media has colonized our minds and our ways of seeing the world to such an extent that nothing is real, or everything is like hyper real, and everybody wants to be famous or an influencer or get rich very quickly. There's no safety net. None of the characters seem to have genuine relationships to each other. It's very barren, it's very bleak, and in that sense maybe it has like a certain satirical aspect to it. And I like the fact I can't predict what's going to happen. Like every episode is its own strange rabbit hole. And I guess for me it's more interesting just to talk about my experience of watching it and the associations that it gives me more than to decide whether it's morally or artistically good or bad. A couple of other moments that I liked, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the parody of a kind of monster movie with Cassie becoming a giant, which is also playing into this particular fetish that this one guy has in the episode, I thought was, it was cute, it was effective, I liked it. But then I'm somebody who likes B movies. I also thought that the moment where they showed a young Cassie and a young Maddie watching Cassie and Maddie leave together was surprisingly poignant, especially being as like the first seasons were sort of about the corruption of innocence. And although I don't like Nate's character much or the way it's developed, the moment when he broke down and was begging because he didn't want to be bad, he wanted to be good. He wanted to be able to make things work within the legal system. He doesn't want to return to being somebody that he's ashamed to be. I thought that actually was surprisingly a moving moment. Okay, that's my thoughts about the season so far. I'm going to come back when it's finished and do one more of these. If you don't like to hear me talking about TV, please come back soon because I'm going to be doing B.S. Johnson's book, The Unfortunates. And if you did enjoy listening to this, please jump in the comments and let me know your own opinion of the episodes I've been discussing. Thanks very much for listening for now, and I'll speak to you soon.